Hi, my name is Jenna Preston, and today I'd like to talk about the role of mental illness in the witch hunts of the 17th and 16th centuries and the continuous modern-day association of hysteria with women. Let me start off by saying fear brings out something different in each person. When people are afraid, they need to feel a sense of control. Often, control may be needed when blame gets thrown and scapegoats are named. If there is someone to blame, women are usually the first chosen, or the mentally ill, or those who just don't fit into a certain box or structure. Fear can lead to irrational decisions with immense consequences, and such decisions may be considered delusional or innovative in some cases. It all depends on the person and how they are viewed in the public eye. The centuries-long persecution of witches is a clear example of society and governments trying to resist social problems by scapegoating innocent prey. Areas that had the most significant social and political turmoil also persecuted the greatest number of witches. Government authorities commanded most witch hunts in response to chaos and death. Investigations commonly involved collecting testimony from subjective sources, including children and confessions through torture and family threats. Execution was usually the standard punishment. Before the infamous Salem witch trials, Connecticut held witchcraft as one of the 12 capital crimes punishable by death. Likewise, mental illness is the scapegoat dependently relied upon by politicians and fearful citizens to blame senseless violence and disorder. According to Arthur Coleman, the basis of the scapegoat myth is this: the group is not to blame for its problems, its bad feelings, its pain, its defeats. These are the responsibilities of a particular individual or subgroup, the scapegoat, who is perceived as being fundamentally different from the rest of the group. They must be excluded or sacrificed for the group to survive and remain whole. Unlike other scapegoats, such as Jews, Muslims, or African Americans, mental illness is more affiliated to witchery due to its exclusive, subjective, and culturally defined nature. Scapegoating the mentally ill every time disturbance or chaos breaks out just allows us to excuse society of any blame. It gives people a way to ignore the problems that give rise to anger, distress, and violence, for example, poverty, rejection, discrimination, oppression, and abuse, and affiliating many women to hysteria, mental illness, and witchcraft is just a cowardly way to approach the actual issues that are so prominent in our society. It is easy to conjoin all of these things together without any reflection on how our society and other things may be contributing to the terror that overwhelms us, rather than just thinking people who don't fit into standards are the source of the issues. In many cases, those who were mentally ill were declared witches because of their behavior that went untreated. Identifying, classifying, and interrogating witches was a process that many women were put through because of the hysteria they displayed, strange appearance, or accusations. Once defined as a witch, defendants would often admit to incomprehensible behaviors such as flying on poles, causing violent storms, and behaved in deranged and frightening ways. If you were not declared a witch, such dramatic behavior would be deemed hysteric, and that was considered a mental illness in itself. Either way, you would most likely be unaccepted in society and looked upon as crazy. Methods for testing the validity of people practicing witchcraft had an outward display of sobriety that allowed professional witch hunters to make their cruel decisions feel justified. This is not the first time people viewed as unacceptable in society have been taken advantage of. For instance, witches might be tied and thrown in the water to see if they would sink, or be examined for a witch's teat, which is an extra nipple that can provide the witch's animal power. They were completely objectified and treated like puppets. It was completely inhumane. If one wanted to identify signs of a person being a witch, they were sure to find something. While fortunately we have moved past the era of misdiagnosing mental illnesses with witch tests, mental health professionals continue to evaluate for mental illness with illogical questionnaires based on biased studies and examining unprofessionally and falsely. As before, the more chaos and violence within society, the more governments and frightened citizens will continue to look for someone and something to blame. Oftentimes, the people blamed are women, homosexuals, transgenders, the mentally ill, people of color, or anyone that goes against what is viewed as socially acceptable by most. Along with mental illness, through the years, hysteria has been considered a disease for females. We're able to explore the historical records, especially during the times before and after the witch hunts, and conclude that the hysterical personality was associated with femininity. For years, it's so evident that society has tried its best to silence those with outspoken opinions and objections to things occurring in society and deemed them mentally unstable or diagnosed with hysteria. Doing this easily discredits the women when speaking about important topics and trauma because they are considered crazy or mentally unwell. Not to mention, the majority of researchers in mental psychology in this area of interest were males. Some may say that males lack empathy and understanding of emotions, especially those that females exhibit. This leads to males just misdiagnosing women with hysteria for having a reaction. Not only have women been misdiagnosed since the beginning of time, but these witches that were killed. Although it's not surprising to expect, but many scholars have proposed that people that were deemed witches were in fact traumatized citizens who were suffering the ills of rape, child abuse, poverty, gender oppression, sexual identity issues, and other psychologically damaging effects. Not coincidentally, these also tend to be the most common factors foretelling a mental illness diagnosis. Trauma survivors and those with developmental disruptions tend to make perfect scapegoats, as they spent their childhood preparing just to be that. Not only were they treated unfairly in society, but also in literature. When a woman is accused of being a witch and her life is in danger, just as it was in Arthur Miller's The Crucible, there is absolutely no sense of protection, and they are completely shamed by the public even if the allegations are false. So many women were falsely declared witches and sentenced to death when trying to explain they do not participate in witchcraft. However, they were still viewed as crazy. Women at the time had absolutely no say or authority, and they were simply viewed as property of men and unheard completely. In The Crucible, the main character, Abigail Williams, has an affair with a man and practices witchcraft in an attempt to kill her lover's wife, Elizabeth. When she is accused, Abigail confesses and begins accusing others of witchcraft along with her. It's quite interesting to see a woman during that time only getting some sort of say and demand in society when she begins manipulating others and acting, as some might call her, crazy. It makes you wonder if women acted this way during that time period and gained the name hysteric because they were trying to be heard from others, and this was the only way to get people's attention. The Crucible does a good job at describing how women were perceived during that time period and how they were inferior through their reactions to the presence of women. Throughout the entire novel, the author builds the overall theme of imbalance between men and women, those who are accepted, listened to, or heard. I think it's important to acknowledge the many attempts through literature, politics, society, and history where women have not been listened to and viewed as hysterical, crazy, or mentally ill for voicing an opinion or acting differently. Women continue to be perceived like this, and the narrative that a person of any mental illness background, gender identity, or social class is uncredible is something that needs to stop in today's society.